Hello, you are watching Shalom World News. I'm David Kerr from Lansing in Michigan, and these are your latest news headlines from around the world. The G7 countries say they will provide humanitarian and military aid to Ukraine for as long as it takes. That decision comes after Monday's Russian air raids on Ukraine, which killed at least 19 people. The Group of Seven, or G7, is an informal bloc of developed democracies comprising of France, Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, Japan, the United States and Canada. The G7 nations meet annually to discuss issues of common interest, such as international security and energy policy. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian bishops of the US have condemned the Russian annexation of territory across Ukraine. In a statement, the bishops of the Ukrainian Right Church stated that they unconditionally condemn the escalation and codification of brutal Russian aggression and ask all people of goodwill to amplify their active spiritual and material solidarity with the people of Ukraine. The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, also known as the Ukrainian Catholic Church, is the largest of the Eastern churches that are in communion with Rome. US Senator Ted Cruz has sent a letter to the US Attorney General in which he criticises a request by the American Medical Association to investigate and prosecute journalists who expose radical gender surgeries for minors. In his letter to the Senator for Texas, also asked if the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, is in fact colluding with the AMA to shut down criticism from the public and the media. He noted that requests by advocacy outfits to stifle critical speech would have been unthinkable before Garland's tenure. Senator Cruz reminded the Attorney General that parents and guardians who voice their concerns over the health and safety of their children are engaging in the First Amendment activity that does not merit prosecution. He also demanded an answer from Mr. Garland as to whether the Attorney General or any staff from the Department of Justice had discussions with medical advisory groups before the request was made by the American Medical Association. An Iranian journalist says she's being punished with solitary confinement after revealing the death in custody of a young woman who had been arrested for improperly wearing a hijab. That's the head covering worn by some Muslim women. 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was arrested in the capital city of Tehran on September the 13th. While being kept at the Vozara detention centre, Miss Amini collapsed and went into a coma. Her death 3 days later sparked widespread claims of torture, with some Iranian women publicly burning the headscarf and torching vehicles in protest. Now, the journalist who broke that story says she's being punished for doing so. Lawyers for Nilüfer Hamedi, who works for the Shark Daily, says that her house was raided by police in the wake of the death, with her Twitter account also being suspended. Since then, say her lawyers, she has been under solitary confinement but is yet to be charged. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, a total of 28 journalists are currently under detention for covering the death of Miss Amini and subsequent protests. A church in love with Jesus has no time for quarrels, gossip and disputes. So said Pope Francis during Holy Mass in Rome to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the opening of the Second Vatican Council. The Holy Father prayed to the Lord to enable Christians to live their lives in response to his question, "Do you love me?" and not to act, he said, as if they are at a funeral wake. The pontiff then exhorted everyone to return to the Second Vatican Council and move beyond themselves in resisting the temptation to self-absorption. He also made an impassioned plea for unity in the Church. It was Pope St. John the 23rd who opened the Second Vatican Council on October the 11th, 1962, in St. Peter's Basilica by delivering his famous Gaudi Mater Ecclesiae, or Mother Church Rejoice speech. It was Vatican II and subsequent documents that ushered in several reforms to the life of the Church, including greater use of the vernacular language during the Roman rite of the Mass, with the priest more often facing versus populum or towards the people. Meanwhile, Pope Francis is to join an inter-religious prayer service for peace at the Colosseum in Rome later this month. The event is part of a summit entitled The Cry for Peace, which is organised by the community of Sant'Egidio. It will run from October the 23rd to the 25th. This year's venue of the Prayer for Peace is the Colosseum. Sant'Egidio has been conducting the Peace Conference annually since 1986, when Pope St. John Paul II convened the First World Day of Prayer for Peace in Assisi in Italy. This year's 3-day meeting will include discussions on dialogue that protects and affirms peace. 1 year after going to the polls in a parliamentary election, the people of Iraq still don't have a government. Now, an appeal has been made by the United Nations Assistance Mission in Iraq urging the country's political parties to work towards the birth of a new government. Iraq's fledgling democracy depends on consensus, yet parties in the minority in parliament don't want to take on their opposition role. The United Nations appeal has been made to various groups, including supporters of Shia leader Muqtada al-Sadr, pro-Iranians, Sunnis, and the Kurds. The UN warns that the political instability could push the nation once again into civil war, which they say would be devastating for the country. The local branch of the global Catholic aid organisation Caritas Internationalis is at the forefront of rescue and relief operations in Venezuela, where a deadly landslide has claimed at least 100 lives. Caritas Venezuela says it assures both solidarity and closeness to the victims. Caritas volunteers and staff are also gathering supplies for the affected people in the north of the country, where so far 39 bodies have been recovered and more than 50 people are still missing. Rescue workers are currently toiling to transport those affected by the landslide, and a search is underway to retrieve the missing people. Torrential rain triggered flooding and landslide in the region, forcing hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes. A bishop in Cameroon is urging people to pray for the release of 5 abducted priests, a nun and other Catholic lay people. It was on September the 16th that armed men attacked and torched the St Mary parish in the Chang in the southwestern Mamfi diocese before abducting the group of clergy and lay faithful. Their whereabouts is still unknown. Now Bishop Agipus Nefon of Kumba Diocese is urging people to continue to pray for their release, and particularly he's encouraging priests across the Central African nation to offer masses for the safe release of the hostages. Abductions and attacks are very frequent in the rest of English-speaking region of Cameroon, where many are demanding independence from the largely francophone nation. Vandals have destroyed a total of 28 images of saints in a church in Brazil. The criminal act took place on October the 10th at the San Mateus parish in the state of Parana. In a press conference held the following day, the parish priest, Father José Carlos Emmanuel de Santos, decried the attacks. He said the attack could only harm the sacred images, but not the faith of the people. Among those images shattered were images of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and Our Lady of the Assumption. Police say they have now identified the perpetrators of the attack. Separately, in another act of vandalism, this time in Colombia, as yet unidentified people set fire to a Marian grotto in the northern town of Corinto. The damaged grotto is dedicated to Our Lady of Mount Carmel. The attack took place on October the 10th. Well, that's your latest headlines for now. Do join us for more tomorrow. You can also join us at swnews.org for news updates. Shalom.